My thoughts already on Leo. Sleeping soundly at our neighbor's apartment. Trusting his mommy to come home. Then the bell over the door chimed again. A shrill, happy sound for the two men who walked in. Their smiles all wrong, their eyes scanning the room with a predator's focus. They weren't here for eggs. They saw him, and a silent, brutal language passed between them. The world tilted on its axis. The air grew thick, heavy with a metallic tang of impending violence. I saw the glint of steel first, a dark flash under a jacket. My body moved before my brain could catch up. It was an instinct born of motherhood. That primal, selfless scream of protection that rips through you when your child is in danger. He wasn't my child. I didn't even know his name. But in that fractured second, all I saw was a life about to be extinguished. I threw the scalding coffee pot. It arced through the air, a clumsy, desperate weapon shattering against the first man's shoulder. And then I was moving my flimsy waitress dress a ridiculous shield as I threw myself in front of the man in the booth. The sound was a deafening crack, a punch to the universe. A searing white-hot pain exploded in my shoulder, stealing my breath, my vision, my future. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was his face. Subscribe now, like, comment and share. For more. Subscribe now, like, comment and share. For more. Subscribe now. The pre-dawn air in the diner has a specific kind of bite, the kind that settles in your bones and reminds you exactly where you are in the social hierarchy. The only thing fighting back is the coffee machine. It hisses and groans like a familiar monster, its humid, caffeinated breath the sole source of warmth in a room that feels like it's holding its breath. This monster belongs to me. It belongs to Leo, too. Every pot of scalding water I brew, every grease-slicked table I scrub until my shoulders ache, is another brick in a wall I'm desperately trying to finish. It's a wall meant to protect my son, a barrier between his innocence and a world that's spent years trying to kick my teeth in. But walls are fragile things, and mine feel like they're made of wet cardboard. I catch a glimpse of myself in the polished chrome of the napkin dispenser, and for a second, I don't recognize the woman looking back. She's a ghost. 25 years old, a daughter of Africa, now completely swallowed by a shapeless white uniform and a cheap, polyester red vest. The name Imani is stitched over my chest, right above a heart I'm convinced stopped beating a lifetime ago. To the truckers and the early shift laborers, I'm not a person, I'm a prop. I am a pair of disembodied hands, a polite, fading smile, the phantom who refills your ceramic mug before you even realize you're thirsty. I am invisible. And in a world this loud, being invisible is the only way to stay safe. Then the door opens, and the atmosphere shifts. He walks in just as the city begins to exhale its first gray breath of morning. He doesn't fit the frame. In this landscape of cracked vinyl booths and watery ketchup bottles, he looks like a slash of black ink across a crumpled, stained page. He is tailored, sharp, and lethal. His presence is a vacuum. He walks in, and suddenly, there isn't enough oxygen left for the rest of us. He's 31, Korean, and impossibly handsome in a way that feels dangerous. His eyes don't just look at you, they weigh you. They hold the cold, hard gleam of ancient secrets and debts that can never be paid in cash. He bypasses the counter and slides into a booth in the far corner, the vantage point of a man who likes to see the exits. I can feel his gaze. It isn't just a look, it's a physical pressure, a heavy weight pressing against the back of my neck. I approach him to take his order, my pulse thundering in my ears like a frantic drum. When I speak, my voice is a nervous tremor, a hairline fracture in my mask. I pray he doesn't hear the fear. I pray he looks right through me like everyone else does. Black coffee, he says. The sound is tectonic, like heavy stones grinding together at the bottom of a well. It's low, final, and carries the weight of a command. I don't linger. I turn away, retreating into the steam and the shadows, wondering if the wall I built for Leo just hit its breaking point. My pulse a frantic drum against my ribs. My thoughts already on Leo. Sleeping soundly at our neighbor's apartment. Trusting his mommy to come home. Then the bell over the door chimed again. A shrill, happy sound for the two men who walked in. Their smiles all wrong, their eyes scanning the room with a predator's focus. They weren't here for eggs. They saw him, and a silent, brutal language passed between them. The world tilted on its axis. The air grew thick, heavy with a metallic tang of impending violence. I saw the glint of steel first, a dark flash under a jacket. My body moved before my brain could catch up. It was an instinct born of motherhood. That primal, selfless scream of protection that rips through you when your child is in danger. He wasn't my child. I didn't even know his name. But in that fractured second, all I saw was a life about to be extinguished. I threw the scalding coffee pot. It arced through the air, a clumsy, desperate weapon shattering against the first man's shoulder. And then I was moving my flimsy waitress dress a ridiculous shield as I threw myself in front of the man in the booth. The sound was a deafening crack, a punch to the universe. A searing white-hot pain exploded in my shoulder, stealing my breath, my vision, my future. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was his face. The cold, unreadable mask had shattered, replaced by a look of stunned, raw disbelief. The man everyone was afraid of was looking at me. The invisible girl, as if I were the only thing in the world that mattered. The world came back in pieces. Jagged shards of sound and light that didn't fit together. The smell of antiseptic and something else. Something clean and expensive like rain on cold stone. A dull throbbing ache pulse from my shoulder. A monstrous heartbeat that wasn't my own. I remembered the crack of the gun, the searing heat, and then nothing. My eyes fluttered open to a ceiling that was too white, too perfect. This wasn't County General. I knew the cracked plaster and flickering fluorescent lights of that place like the back of my hand. This was different. Silent, serene, a gilded cage, a figure moved in the periphery, and I flinched, a wave of nausea and fear washing over me. Leo, I croaked, the name tearing from my throat, raw and desperate. Where is my son? The man from the diner, the Korean man whose life I had inexplicably saved, stepped into my line of sight. He was still wearing the impeccable black suit, but it seemed rumpled, as if he'd been sitting in this chair for hours, days. His face was a storm of conflicting emotions, but his voice, when he spoke, was unnervingly calm. He is safe, he said. The words precise, deliberate. He is with people I trust. People I trust. The phrase hung in the air, heavy with implications I couldn't begin to unravel. I tried to sit up, but the pain was a fiery claw that dug into me, and I fell back against pillows that were softer than clouds. He was there in an instant, a hand hovering near my uninjured arm. His touch a ghost of warmth I could feel without contact. Do not move, Imani, he said, my name sounding strange and foreign on his tongue. He knew my name. Of course, he did. A man like him could find out anything. His assistant, a man with a face as stoic and unmoving as a granite cliff, entered the room without a sound, handing him a tablet. The man Jaywok, I would later learn his name was, never took his eyes off me. He issued a series of low, rapid-fire commands in Korean, his tone leaving no room for argument. The assistant bowed slightly and disappeared. Jaywok turned his attention back to me, his dark eyes searching my face. You took a bullet for me, he stated, not a question, but a declaration of a fact that had irrevocably bound us together. That creates a debt. I do not leave my debts unpaid. The words weren't a promise of a reward, they were a verdict, a life sentence delivered with the cold precision of a falling blade. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird, desperate and fluttering. I wasn't a hero. I was a single mother who worked 60 hours a week, someone whose biggest battles were usually fought with a calculator and a pile of past due bills. I had a son to raise and a life built on a foundation of grit and exhaustion. I couldn't afford a debt, especially not to a man like Jaywok, who moved through a world of shadows and choreographed violence. I don't want anything, I whispered, the words tasting like a lie even to me. What I wanted was my son. I wanted my old, tired life back. It is no longer about what you want, he replied, the finality in his voice chilling me to the bone. He pulled his chair closer, the silence between us stretching tight, thick with everything left unsaid. In that moment, I knew the Imani who refilled coffee cups in the pre-dawn gray was gone. By stepping in front of a bullet, I'd stepped into the line of fire of an empire. My recovery was a slow, surreal journey through a landscape of quiet luxury. I woke up not to the familiar clamor of a city hospital, the squeaky cart wheels and the smell of industrial bleach, but to the gentle, rhythmic whisper of filtered air. Everything was too clean. The room was a vast suite of creams and soft grays, smelling of fresh lilies and expensive stillness. It was a sensory vacuum. Back home, the air smelled like bus exhaust and the deep fryer grease that lived in the pores of my uniform. Those smells were honest. They meant I was working, that I was surviving. Here, the scent of the lilies felt like a funeral shroud, too sweet and suffocating. But it was managed with a quiet efficiency that was both comforting and terrifying. A woman named Mrs. Kim became my gentle warden. She was older with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and a smile that didn't quite reach them, hinting at a shared history of sorrow. She moved with a silent grace, changing my bandages, bringing me trays of food that looked like art, and speaking in a soft, melodic voice that soothed the frayed edges of my nerves. She was, I gathered, his former nanny, now his housekeeper, a figure of maternal stability in his chaotic life. Mr. Kwan is a man of great honor, she told me one afternoon as she helped me sip a fragrant broth. He feels a profound responsibility for what has happened. I wanted to scream that his honor felt like a prison. My every waking thought was a frantic prayer for Leo. I trusted Jaywok's word that he was safe. But a mother's heart knows no logic. I needed to see him, to touch his face, to breathe in the familiar scent of his hair. This beautiful room with its silk sheets and priceless art was a cage and my anxiety was a frantic bird beating its wings against the bars. I need to see my son, I pleaded, my voice cracking with unshed tears. Please, Mrs. Kim's gentle smile faltered. All in good time, my dear. You must heal. Mr. Kwan has ensured the boy is well cared for. He is the best of everything, but Leo didn't need the best of everything. He needed his mother. That evening, Jaywok appeared at my door, a silent shadow against the fading light. He didn't speak, merely stood there, his presence filling the room. He had a small, almost imperceptible bruise on his cheekbone, the only visible sign of the violence at the diner. He carried the weight of that day differently than I did. My wound was a physical manifestation of my weakness. His was a mark of a battle he had walked away from. He finally stepped forward, placing a small, intricately carved wooden bird on my bedside table. This was my mother's, he said, his voice a low rumble. She believed it watched over those who are healing. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender. It caught me off guard. It was a glimpse past the armor, a fleeting view of the man beneath. But it wasn't enough. When can I see Leo? I asked, my voice firm despite the tremor running through me. His gaze hardened slightly, the vulnerability vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. When it is safe, he said, you saved my life, Imani. That makes you a target to my enemies. Until I neutralize that threat, you and your son will remain here. Under my protection, there it was again. Protection that felt like possession. I was a pawn in his dangerous game. My life a debt he was determined to repay whether I wanted him to or not. I was trapped in his world, a world of beautiful, silent rooms and unspoken threats, and the only thing I could do was wait. The moment the door opened and my son ran in, the world tilted back onto its axis. Mommy. Leo's cry was a symphony, a sound that healed a part of me the medicine couldn't touch. He scrambled onto the bed, his small arms wrapping around my neck, careful of my injured shoulder. I buried my face in his curls, inhaling his scent, the familiar mix of sunshine and childhood. And for the first time in days, I could breathe. Tears streamed down my face, hot and cleansing. He was real. He was safe. He pulled back, his brow furrowed with a 6-year-old solemn concern. Does it hurt bad, Mommy? I managed a watery smile, stroking his cheek. Not anymore, baby. Not now that you're here. I looked up and saw Jaywok standing in the doorway, a silent sentinel watching our reunion. For a fleeting second, his cold, guarded expression softened, and a flicker of something deeply human longing perhaps, or a profound sadness crossed his features. He had orchestrated this moment, understood on a fundamental level that my healing was inextricably tied to my son. It was a demonstration of his power, yes, but it was also a moment of startling empathy. Later, after Leo had explored every corner of the vast suite and fallen asleep in a nest of pillows beside me, Jaywok returned. He dismissed the nurse with a quiet nod and took her place in the chair beside my bed. The silence was different this time, less tense, more contemplative. He is a good boy, Jaywok said, his gaze on Leo's sleeping form. You have raised him well. It was a simple compliment, but from him it felt like a profound acknowledgement. He's my whole world, I whispered. He nodded, his eyes turning to me. Dark and serious. I understand, he said. Which is why you must listen to me very carefully. The men who came to the diner were sent by a man named Mjun. We were once associates, brothers even. But his greed consumed him. He believes that what his mind should be his, and he will stop at nothing to take it. The air grew cold as he spoke. This wasn't just business. It was personal. A deep and bitter betrayal. Because you intervened, he continued, his voice dropping lower. He now knows I have a weakness. He will not see a brave woman. He will see a tool, a lever to use against me. By saving me, you have placed yourself and your son in his line of sight. The fear I had been holding at bay came rushing back, a cold tide. It wasn't just about me anymore. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. For now, I want you to heal, he said, his gaze intense. And I need you to trust me. I gave my word that you and your son would be protected. I do not break my word. His declaration hung between us, a solemn vow. I was living in his gilded cage. Yes, but I was beginning to understand that the bars weren't just to keep me in. They were to keep the monsters out. My fierce, independent spirit railed against the loss of my freedom, but my maternal heart was terrified into submission. For Leo, I would do anything. I would even learn to trust this enigmatic, dangerous man who controlled this shadowy enterprise, the man who now held our lives in his hands. The first move came not as a bang, but as a quiet, chilling whisper from the world I had left behind. Mrs. Kim brought me a tablet one afternoon, her face etched with a rare and unsettling worry. On the screen was a news report. A fire, a suspected arson at my old apartment building. My stomach plummeted, the bile of fear rising in my throat. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a message scrolled in smoke and ashes intended for Jaywok but delivered at my doorstep. The report mentioned a faulty wire, a tragic accident, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that Mjun was behind it. He was showing Jaywok that he could reach into his life, touch the people he chose to protect, and burn their worlds down. This was his opening salvo, a ruthless demonstration of his reach and his willingness to target the innocent. I saw Jaywok later that day. He said nothing of the fire, but I saw the Arctic fury in his eyes, a controlled, terrifying rage simmering just beneath the surface. The security around the estate, already formidable, tightened into an impenetrable fortress. More guards, their faces grim and professional, patrolled the grounds. New protocols were put in place. The gilded cage had just received reinforced steel bars. The escalating danger forced us together. He would come to my suite in the evenings, ostensibly to give me updates. But they became more than that. They became hushed conversations in the twilight. The space between us charged with a tension that had nothing to do with the threat outside. We were two worlds colliding, his shrouded in secrets and violence, mine defined by scraped knees and bedtime stories. One night, he found me in the private library, a vast two-story room filled with the scent of old paper and leather. I had been restless, unable to sleep, haunted by the images of the fire. He didn't question why I was there. He simply poured 2 glasses of amber liquid and handed one to me. He was my father's most trusted lieutenant, Jaywok said, his voice low as he stared into the fire crackling in the massive hearth. Minan, I grew up with him. He taught me how to fight, how to read people. I loved him like a brother. He took a slow sip, the silence stretching. But my father chose me as his successor. He saw a darkness in Mjun, a hunger that could never be filled. That jealousy has festered for a decade now. Now he wants to burn down everything my father built. Everything that is now mine. It was the most he had ever revealed about himself. A crack in the formidable armor. I saw not just a powerful mafia boss, but a son burdened by a legacy haunted by a betrayal that cut deeper than any knife. My heart ached for him. An unexpected and dangerous emotion. I was no longer just his responsibility. I was becoming his confidant. He turned to look at me, his eyes dark and intense in the firelight. He will not stop until one of us is dead. Imani, he was closer now, the space between us shrinking until I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He thinks you are my weakness, he whispered, his gaze dropping to my lips. He is wrong. You are my reason. His hand came up, his fingers gently brushing a stray curl from my cheek. The touch was electric, a jolt that shot through my entire body. Every instinct screamed at me to pull away, to run from this dangerous, complicated man. But I was rooted to the spot, caught in the gravity of his confession, the air thick with unspoken promises and the terrifying, thrilling possibility of something more. The open loop of his touch. The cliffhanger of his words left me breathless. I was no longer just a waitress who had taken a bullet. I was standing at the edge of a precipice, and a part of me, a part one hadn't known existed, wanted to jump. The world narrowed to the space between us, the crackling fire and the scent of old books fading into a dull background hum. His thumb stroked my cheek, a feather-like touch that sent a wildfire racing through my veins. His confession, "You are my reason," echoed in the cavern of my chest. It was a terrifying, beautiful weight. I had been invisible my entire life, and now I was the reason for a man who commanded shadows. My breath hitched. This was insane. He was danger, a world I had no business being a part of. But he was also the man who had looked at my son with a gentle understanding, who had shared a piece of his broken past with me, who had made me feel seen for the first time in years. My mind screamed at me to run, to preserve the small, simple I closed the infinite decimal distance between us. My lips met his, and it wasn't some soft, tentative movie moment kiss. It was a collision, a desperate, raw affirmation of life in a room that had spent too much time talking about death. He tasted of expensive whiskey and a loneliness so deep it felt like a physical cold. It was the taste of absolute control finally hitting its breaking point and shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. His hand came up to cup my jaw, his fingers surprisingly gentle, holding me as if I were something precious he was terrified of dropping. The kiss deepened, moving past desire and into a language of shared pain and a strange, burgeoning hope that words would only ruin. When we finally broke apart, the air between us felt charged, thick with the aftershock of what we'd just done. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes tightly shut. I have not allowed myself this, he breathed, the words sounding like a confession ripped from a decade of exile. My life has been a fortress. No weaknesses. No attachments. You walked in, Imani, and you burned it to the ground. In that moment, I saw the truth. He wasn't just a powerful man sitting in a high-rise throne. He was a prisoner of his own making, and somehow, against all logic, I was the key to his escape. That realization was more intimate than the kiss itself. It was the moment I stopped being his debt and started being his reality. The days that followed were a fragile truce with the world outside. We existed in a bubble, a stolen pocket of time where the looming threat of Mjun felt like a storm brewing on a distant horizon. He took me through the gardens, his voice dropping its iron edge as he explained the meaning behind every stone and flower. There was a quiet passion in him that belied his ruthless reputation, a hidden map of a man I was only just beginning to read. I watched him with Leo, saw the way he knelt to the ground to explain the intricate workings of a toy car, his voice soft, his usual intensity replaced by a patient tenderness. A ghost of a smile would touch his lips. And in those moments, he wasn't the feared head of a criminal enterprise. He was just Jaywok, a man learning how to live again. I was falling in love with him. The thought was a terrifying plunge into a deep, unknown ocean. It was a love born in violence and fear, nurtured in a gilded cage. But it was real. It was fierce and protective, a mirror of the instincts I had for my own son. I knew our bubble couldn't last, that the storm would eventually break. But for now, I held on to this fragile piece with both hands, praying it wouldn't be ripped away. The storm broke on a Tuesday. It arrived not with a roar of thunder, but with a silent, terrifying intrusion. I was in the garden with Leo, watching him chase butterflies, the sun warm on my skin. For a moment, it felt normal. A mother and her son, enjoying a beautiful day. Then I saw it. Tucked into the petals of a perfect white rose near the garden wall was a small black feather. My blood ran cold. It was identical to the one tattooed on the wrist of the man who had shot me at the diner. It wasn't a threat left for Jaywok. It was a message left for me. He had been here inside the walls. Mjun or one of his men had breached the fortress, had walked through this garden where my son was playing and had left his calling card. The fragile sense of safety shattered into a million pieces. I snatched Leo up, my heart hammering against my ribs, and ran back into the house, screaming for the guards. The lockdown was instantaneous and absolute. Steel shutters descended over the windows, plunging the house into a dim, artificial twilight. Guards swept the grounds, their voices clipped and urgent over their earpieces. Jaywok was a tempest of controlled fury. When he saw the feather I held in my trembling hand, the last vestiges of the gentle man from the garden vanished, replaced by the cold, lethal predator I had first met. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. His voice dropped to a deadly whisper as he issued commands, his eyes like chips of obsidian. The breach was traced to a new gardener, a man who had been thoroughly vetted, but had obviously been turned. Mjun hadn't tried to attack. He had simply proven he could. He was playing with us, a cat with two terrified mice. That night, the tension between Jaywok and me became a different kind of storm. You and Leo will be moved, he stated, his back to me as he stared out at the now empty, flood gardens to a secure facility outside the city. No, I said, my voice shaking but firm. I'm not a package to be shipped around Jaywok. I'm not leaving. He spun around, his control finally cracking. This is not a negotiation, Imani. He was within feet of you, of your son. Do you understand what he would do to you to get to me? And what about you? I shot back, stepping closer, my fear eclipsed by a sudden fierce anger. You're just going to go after him. What happens if you don't come back? We'll be safe in your facility, but we'll be alone. I will not trade one cage for another. It was the first time I had ever truly challenged him, and the shock on his face was palpable. He saw that I was not a damsel in distress waiting for rescue. I was a fighter, a mother who would stand her ground. He stared at me, his jaw tight, a war raging within him. The desire to protect me was battling with the dawning realization that I would not be protected from a distance. I am ending this, he said, his voice raw with a terrible finality. Tonight, but you will do exactly as my head of security, Jean, tells you. You will not leave the panic room until I return. That is not a request. He was going into the storm, and he was leaving me behind in the suffocating silence of the bunker, my heart caught in my throat, praying for his return. The silence of the panic room was a living thing. It was thick and suffocating, broken only by the hum of the air filtration system and the frantic, shallow rhythm of my own breathing. Leo was asleep on a small cot, his face peaceful, blissfully unaware of the war raging just outside these reinforced walls. Jean Jaywok, stoic head of security, had led us down here, his face an unreadable mask of professionalism, but I had seen the grim tension in his shoulders. Mr. Kwan's orders were absolute, he had said. No matter what you hear, you do not open this door. And so I waited. Every creak of the house above was a gunshot. Every distant siren was a harbinger of doom. My imagination was a torture chamber, conjuring images of Jaywok, betrayed and alone, walking into a trap set by the man he once called a brother. I paced the small room, a caged animal, my hands clenched into fists. I replayed our last conversation, the fire in his eyes, the raw finality in his voice. I had fallen in love with a man who walked hand in hand with death, and the price of that love was this helpless, gut-wrenching terror. Hours bled into one another. My phone had no signal this far underground. I was cut off, blind and deaf to the fate of the man who had become the center of my world. The silence was finally broken by a frantic buzzing from the intercom panel. It was Jean Imani. His voice was strained, laced with a static I couldn't identify as technological or pure panic. They're inside the house. It was a diversion. Mjun sent a decoy team to draw Mr. Kwan out. The main assault is here. The floor dropped out from under me. Jaywok wasn't fighting Mjun. He was on the other side of the city chasing a ghost while the real monster was at the door. He planned this. I whispered, the cold strategic cruelty of it washing over me. He wanted Jaywok gone so he could get to us. We're holding them at the main staircase, but they're pushing through. Jean grunted. I could hear gunfire now. Muffled but unmistakable. Stay in the room. We will hold. The line went dead. I stared at the steel door. My heart a frantic drum. I could stay here. I could obey. I could hide behind this impenetrable wall and pray that Jean and his men were enough. But I wasn't the same woman from the diner. Jaywok had shown me my own strength. I would not cower in a bunker while men died to protect me. My gaze fell on a ventilation shaft near the ceiling. Its grate held in place by 4 simple screws. It was small, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was big enough. A desperate, wild plan began to form in my mind, a choice born of love and a fierce refusal to be a victim. I would not be the weakness Mjun could use to break Jaywok. I would be the one he never saw coming. The air in the vent was thick with a smell of dust and cordite. It was a tight squeeze, the cold metal scraping against my back as I shimmied through the narrow passage, every muscle screaming in protest. Below me, the house had become a war zone. The symphony of destruction was deafening. The sharp crack of gunfire, the splintering of wood, the guttural shouts of men engaged in brutal close-quarters combat. My only thought was Leo. I had locked him inside the panic room, telling him it was a game of hide and seek and that he couldn't come out until Mommy came back with his secret password. The lie felt like acid on my tongue, but his safety was paramount. My desperate plan was simple. Get to the master control room in Jaywok's office and trigger the Halon fire suppression system. It wouldn't kill them, but it would flood the main levels with gas, incapacitating everyone long enough for me to get to Leo and for Jaywok to return. I dropped down into the silent dark hallway behind the main library, my bare feet making no sound on the polished wood. The fight was concentrated at the front of the house. I had a clear path. I crept into Jaywok's office, the room where he had first kissed me, now a sanctuary in the heart of the storm. My fingers flew across the security panel, my mind racing. Then a cold voice from the doorway made my blood freeze. Clever girl, Mjun stood there, a predator's smile on his handsome, cruel face. He was immaculately dressed, untouched by the violence he had unleashed. One of his men held a bruised and struggling Jean by the arms. I knew you weren't the type to just sit and wait, Mjun continued, stepping into the room. Jaywok always did have a weakness for strays with spirit. He's not weak. I spat, my body trembling, but my voice steady. His weakness, Mjun sneered, is his sentimentality, his honor. This ridiculous debt he feels he owes you. A debt I am about to collect on his behalf, he nodded to his man. A pistol was pressed to Jin's temple. You're going to call Jaywok, Mjun commanded, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. You will tell him you have his most prized possessions, his loyal dog and his little bird. You will tell him to come alone, or you will watch them both die. The final confrontation wasn't going to be a firefight. It was going to be an execution, and I was the bait. But as I looked at the emergency panel, my eyes landed on a different button. Not the fire suppression, a different, more final protocol. The emergency lockdown. It would seal the entire house. No one in, no one out. Just before I could press it, the roar of a powerful engine filled the night and tires screamed on the gravel outside. Jaywok was back. Munas widened. The final act had begun and we were all trapped on the stage. The world exploded in a maelstrom of controlled chaos. Jaywok burst into the house not as a man but as a force of nature, a whirlwind of vengeful fury. The confrontation with Mjun was brutal and personal, a dance of death years in the making. While his men engaged Mjun's remaining forces, Jaywok moved with a singular purpose, his eyes locked on the man who had been his brother. It wasn't a gunfight. It was a visceral hand-to-hand battle fueled by a decade of betrayal. I used the distraction. While all eyes were on the two titans clashing in the grand foyer, I slammed my hand on the emergency lockdown panel. Steel doors slammed shut throughout the house with the finality of a tomb. We were all sealed inside. Mjun, realizing his escape was cut off, grew desperate. He pulled his pistol, not aiming for JW, but for me. It was his last cowardly gambit. He knew Jaywok would shield me. But before he could fire, a heavy bronze statue from a nearby pedestal swung in a vicious arc, striking his arm with a sickening crunch of bone. It was Jean, freed in the chaos. He had acted, his loyalty absolute. The gun clattered to the floor. The fight was over. Mjun was apprehended, his empire of greed and revenge crumbling around him. The silence that followed the storm was more profound than any noise. It was the sound of survival. Jaywok came to me, his face bruised, his suit torn, but his eyes holding a universe of relief and a love so fierce it took my breath away. He pulled me into his arms, holding me tight against him, his head buried in my hair. It's over, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. It's over. In the weeks and months that followed, a new world was built upon the ashes of the old one. The shadows of Jaywok's enterprise remained, but he was a changed man. The cold, unreadable mask was gone, replaced by a warmth that was reserved for me and Leo. He taught Leo. How to fly a kite in the gardens, his laughter echoing in the open air, a sound I never thought I would hear. He was still a man of immense power, but he now wielded it to build, not just to protect. He established a charitable foundation, pouring his resources into the forgotten neighborhoods of the city, helping the invisible people, the people I used to be. My life was no longer defined by desperation, but by a profound and quiet joy. I had found a home not in a place, but in a person. I had found a love that was forged in fire and had emerged stronger than steel. Sometimes I think back to that tired, invisible waitress, the one who impulsively threw a pot of coffee and changed her destiny forever. Maybe you feel invisible. Too, maybe you feel like your life is a series of quiet, desperate moments. But I'm here to tell you that inside every invisible person is a hero waiting for their moment. A single act of courage, of kindness, of stepping out of the shadows can change everything. You have a strength you haven't even discovered yet. Our story, born from a bullet, became a testament to the fact that even the deepest wounds can heal and that the most unlikely person can become your reason for everything. If our story moved you, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of love against all odds. Let us know in the comments what a single act of courage means to you.